Level 1. The Punji Pit. This was the most common booby trap in the entire Vietnam War, and it was deceptively simple to construct. Viet Cong fighters would dig a narrow pit into the jungle floor, usually between 2 and 4 feet deep, and line the bottom with sharpened bamboo stakes called punji sticks. The bamboo was cut at an angle to create a needle-like point, then fire-hardened to make it stiff and strong enough to punch straight through the sole of a boot and into the foot of whoever was unlucky enough to step into it. Some versions were designed with angled stakes so that when a soldier's leg plunged downward, the barbs caught on the flesh and made it nearly impossible to pull the foot back out without tearing the wound open further. But here is what took the Punji Pit from a simple spike trap to something genuinely sinister. The Viet Cong would smear the stakes with human or animal feces before covering the hole with a thin layer of sticks, leaves, and dirt designed to blend perfectly into the jungle floor. The goal was not necessarily to kill the soldier, it was to infect him. In the humid, bacteria-laden environment of the Vietnamese jungle, a puncture wound coated in waste could become severely infected within hours. A soldier who survived the initial wound might spend weeks fighting fever and sepsis, pulling him out of combat and straining the medical resources of his unit. The trap was designed not just to hurt one man, but to burden an entire platoon. Soldiers were taught to look for disturbed earth and unnatural patterns in the forest floor, but in dense jungle, moving slowly enough to spot every covered pit was nearly impossible. Level 2. The Snake Pit. The Snake Pit operated on the same basic principle as the Punji Pit. It was a concealed hole dug into the ground or cut into the wall of a tunnel. But instead of sharpened stakes at the bottom, the pit contained live venomous snakes, most commonly the many-banded crate or the Malayan pit viper, two of the most dangerous snakes in all of Southeast Asia. The crate in particular is responsible for a large proportion of snake-related deaths in the region. Its venom attacks the nervous system, and symptoms can be subtle at first before becoming catastrophic. The pit viper acts faster, causing tissue destruction that can be devastating even when the bite itself is not immediately fatal. The Viet Cong would sometimes tie snakes directly to the inside of tunnel openings or attach them to bamboo rods and position them so that a hand reaching into a dark space would disturb the animal and trigger a strike. A soldier clearing a tunnel or pushing through dense vegetation would have no warning at all. After word spread among American troops that snakes were being used as weapons, soldiers became intensely aware of every shadow and every rustle in the underbrush. The jungle was already alien and hostile. Level 3. The Venus Flytrap. This was a spring-loaded mechanism built around a pair of wooden or metal jaws. The design was modeled loosely on the kind of animal traps that had been used for centuries in rural Southeast Asia to catch wild boar and deer. The Viet Cong adapted this design for human targets. 2 curved sections were hinged at the bottom, lined on the inside with sharpened bamboo stakes or scavenged nails pointing inward, and held open under tension by a simple trigger mechanism connected to a nearly invisible tripwire concealed beneath a layer of debris. When a soldier's foot landed on the trigger plate, the jaws snapped shut with enormous force around the ankle or lower leg. The inward-pointing spikes drove through clothing and flesh, and the spring tension held the trap locked in place. The soldier could not simply pull free. The more he struggled, the deeper the spikes bit. Getting the trap open required tools. In a jungle where the enemy could be watching from 10 feet away and completely invisible, being immobilized was often a death sentence. Level 4. The Cartridge Trap. Now the traps start to kill more reliably. This one required no explosives, no engineering, and almost no materials. It required only a bullet and an understanding of how a bullet works. The Cartridge Trap, sometimes called the toe popper, was brutally efficient in its simplicity. A live rifle cartridge was placed point up inside a short bamboo or metal tube that was just wide enough to hold it snugly. A small nail or hardened bamboo pin was fixed at the base of the tube directly below the primer at the bottom of the cartridge. The whole assembly was buried just beneath the surface of a trail. When a soldier stepped on the cartridge, the downward pressure drove the primer down onto the pin, firing the round directly up through the sole of the boot and into the foot. The wound was not usually fatal, but it was not supposed to be. A destroyed foot took a man entirely out of the fight, required evacuation, and demanded medical resources. The cartridge trap could be produced in enormous quantities in almost no time at all. Viet Cong fighters could seed a trail with dozens of them in an hour and vanish back into the jungle before dawn. American soldiers began walking with extreme care, probing the ground ahead with sticks, moving in single file, watching the footsteps of the man ahead. The Cartridge Trap slowed entire operations to a crawl. In a war where time and movement were everything, making the enemy walk slowly was its own kind of victory. Level 5. The Bamboo Whip. It was sometimes called the whip trap or the sprung pole trap, used the natural flexibility of green bamboo as a weapon. A long bamboo pole or a collection of bamboo rods were bent under extreme tension and held in a cocked position by a trigger connected to a tripwire stretched across a path. The end of the pole was often fitted with sharpened bamboo stakes, nails, or barbed wire. When a soldier's leg or boot caught the wire, the tension released and the pole snapped forward at tremendous speed, sweeping through the air in a wide arc at roughly chest or head height. The speed of the strike was the key. Bamboo under that kind of stored tension could release faster than a person could react, and at that velocity, even a blunt impact could fracture bone. A pole fitted with spikes could cause devastating facial and throat injuries, and the sweeping arc of the strike often hit not just the soldier who triggered the wire, but the man walking directly behind him as well. The trap was also brilliant in its placement. Tripwires were strung across narrow paths, across stream crossings, through doorways in abandoned villages, across the entrance to clearings. Soldiers began using long sticks to feel the air ahead of them as they moved through confined spaces. The psychological effect was profound. Every narrow gap, every doorway, every overgrown path became something to dread. Level 6. The Mace and Tiger Trap. The Mace Trap and the Tiger Trap both operated on the principle of suspended weight released with lethal force. The mace was constructed from a large wooden or bamboo ball studded with sharpened iron spikes or hardened bamboo stakes. This spike ball, which could weigh anywhere from 15 to 50 pounds, was hung from a rope in a tree above a trail and held in position by a trigger mechanism linked to a tripwire at ground level. When a soldier tripped the wire, the ball dropped in a short arc and swung forward at chest or head height with enough force to punch completely through a person. The Tiger Trap was a variation that used a platform of weighted stakes suspended above a trail, designed to drop straight down rather than swing forward. Building these required real labor. The Viet Cong would spend days selecting the right trees, bending and shaping bamboo, testing the tension on the trigger mechanism, and camouflaging the entire installation so thoroughly that it looked like an ordinary stretch of jungle. The skill and patience required was significant, which meant these traps were placed deliberately in locations where soldiers were most likely to move, at choke points and stream crossings, and along the edges of known patrol routes. Finding one of these traps without triggering it was extraordinarily difficult. From ground level, the suspended weight was hidden by the canopy. The wire was invisible in the shadows. The first sign that the trap was there was usually the sound of it releasing. Level 7. Rigged Ordnance. And then there is this. Everything before this level was designed by hand using natural materials built on mechanical principles. This level takes the most destructive force human beings have ever invented and turns it into a tripwire. Rigged ordnance was the term used for unexploded bombs, artillery shells, grenades, and mines that the Viet Cong recovered from American bombardments and repurposed as booby traps. The United States dropped an almost incomprehensible amount of ordnance on Vietnam, and a significant percentage of it did not detonate on impact. This left the jungle littered with live explosive material that the Viet Cong collected and transformed into weapons of enormous destructive power. A standard 500-pound bomb that failed to detonate could be dug up, fitted with a new detonating mechanism, reburied beneath a road or trail, and wired to a pressure plate or a pull trigger. When triggered, the explosion was not the contained blast of a purpose-built mine. It was the full energy of a bomb designed to destroy buildings and vehicles. The crater left behind was sometimes 10 feet wide. There was no surviving the center of that detonation. But the sophistication went beyond simply reburying bombs. Viet Cong engineers became experts at modifying grenades to remove their safety mechanisms and rig them with external triggers. They wired artillery shells inside hollow trees and connected them to nearly invisible tripwires at knee height in jungle clearings. They stacked multiple smaller devices in sequence so that the secondary explosion would catch the soldiers responding to the first. They studied American patrol behavior, identified the routes that units favored, and placed the largest devices in the spots where a responding squad would naturally converge. American soldiers learned to call in explosive ordnance disposal teams before entering areas that had been heavily bombed, knowing that what the bombs hadn't destroyed on the way down might be waiting for them on the ground. Entire operations were delayed while engineers swept roads yard by yard. The jungle itself had become a minefield, and the Viet Cong had built it largely from weapons that the United States had already used once before.